everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I will be doing my February wrap-up, which is way long overdue. I have a lot of books, so let's just get on with it. To be completely honest, my February as a rated month did not start very well. I finally finished Space Mag by Emma Jane, which was one of those indie authors, small publishers books that I got from NetGalley, and unfortunately that book did not live up to my expectations, which is probably understandable why I read this book for months and I couldn't finish it. Finally I finished it at the beginning of February. This is a standalone, supposedly a space opera with the main gay couple in it. I really wanted to like this book. This is a story about the guy who accidentally, by using an unknown artifact like a ring, gets sucked into a different planet, and basically his journey on how he's trying to make sense of everything that is happening and also find that point when he was transported to another world, so he wants to go back to Earth. I did not like the writing. It was very all over the place, very jumbled. Nothing was really explained why things were going the way they were going. Everything was disclosed at the very end of the book, and basically this huge thing that a huge mystery on why he was chosen, it just did not leave to any expectations. I gave this book 2 stars. I have a complete review on my blog. I'll provide the link down below, but sufficient to say that I do not recommend it. Then I was in the mood for some manga just to kind of clean my palette, and unfortunately I did not pick good ones. I chose some mangas from Comixology, which is a very popular service. I believe they're owned by Amazon. This is where you can purchase manga and different comics. I also got something from Hoopla and some other website. Anyway, I read several mangas. One was, I believe, from the library. It was called Blank Slate. I read volumes 1 and 2. This is a story about very sufficient killer who has some memory gaps and doesn't really know anything about himself except for the fact that he gets triggered really easily into violence and he has no problems killing anyone. And it was, I believe when I read the synopsis on Goodreads and also some of the reviews, it was mentioned that this manga is somewhat reminiscent of Death Note. It's not. Just not. Do not compare it to Death Note. Blank Slate, unfortunately, the first volume just went completely flat for me. I was not really invested into the story or characters or anything. I just liked the art. I gave first volume 2 stars and the second volume 3 stars, but like I said, I mostly was there for the art. Then I read manga called Black Sun, volumes 1 and 2. It's very explicit manga and it has a lot of elements with dubious consent and basically rape. I like the art, but everything when it comes to like lack of consent and how they basically tried to mash those 2 characters together did not sit well with me. The first volume was a reread because I wanted to read the second volume. I got them both from the library and I felt like I needed to refresh my memory, and I was not a huge fan. I think I left the same rating of 3 stars, but still there's a lot of dubious consent, and I just, like I said, I really like the art, but even the story, I don't really want to talk much about this manga. I just want to say that I'll provide all the links down below to Goodreads as well. If you want to check it out, please do, but like I said, dubious consent. Like, I don't know why people even create this type of stories. I have no clue. Then I read another manga which was slightly better but also disappointing when it comes to lack of consent and how they deal with mental illnesses, especially PTSD. It actually, reading those mangas kind of prompted me to look into how sexuality and sexual abuse is treated in Japan, and the things that I read online completely blew my mind. Obviously, I cannot really comment on that in the sense that I cannot pass judgment on somebody else's culture, but it's not something that I can accept for myself or be okay with. So, however, just reading more about that and what consent means in sexual relationships in Japan made me realize that a lot of stories that I see in manga and even anime come from that, I would say, huge difference. It's enormous difference between how consent is viewed in sexual relationships or in relationships in Japan and, say, Western world. I'm not going to talk about it on my channel. However, if I find the link that I read, I'll provide it down below, but beware, it's somewhat hard to read. So, like I said, my reading month of February did not start very well. I was not very satisfied with what I read at the very beginning, but I managed to finish an audiobook, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Conan Doyle, read by Stephen Fry, and obviously I gave it 5 stars because I love Sherlock Holmes. There's absolutely no other rating I could have given this book. I really enjoy listening to Stephen Fry. I believe his voice has changed since he read and narrated Harry Potter, and it really well suited for this book. Obviously, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes is probably one of the most well-known collections, and I loved it. I basically could remember the plot for like every single story, and I was very happy to reread them again. Next, I read another graphic novel that's been on my radar for a while, and I've been meaning to read it and keep getting it from the library online and not reading it. It was like, why I'm taking so much time to read it? And that was Baking with Kafka by Tom Gold. So Baking with Kafka came out last October, and this is a collection of different comic strips by Tom Gold, who is quite a well-known comic artist and illustrator, and some of his works get published by New York Times, by The Guardian, and I talked about his graphic novels and collection of comic strips quite a lot on my channel. I really enjoy his style, and Baking with Kafka was exactly what I was looking for. I read his Goliath, which was kind of like a standalone graphic novel, but I was not a huge fan of it. However, you all are jealous of my Jetpack, which was also a collection of comic strips I absolutely loved, and I was waiting for Baking with Kafka because this was exactly what I was looking for. Different comic strips, every page is different, absolutely hilarious, highly recommend, and I gave it 4.5 stars. From that moment, my reading experience kinda skyrocketed because I read this book, and this is The Wicker King by Chram. So this is a story about 2 boys who are friends and has been friends since early childhood. One is Jack, another one is August. And one day, Jack starts to experience hallucinations. He starts seeing things and items and objects and also beings which are not from this world. And August is left with 2 options, either to believe Jack or to call him insane. He decides to believe him, and this is an absolutely heartbreaking and heart-wrenching story about friendship, love, about believing in your friends and believing in yourself and trying to deal with everything which is happening. And I started reading this book and I was like, okay, I'll give it a go. And then after a couple of pages, I realized that this is going to be one of my auto-buy authors. The story is written in a very compelling way. Each chapter is relatively small, like very short, and some chapters have titles which kind of give you an idea about what this chapter is going to be about. There are also some illustrations, some photographs, and also kind of doodles on the margins. Plus, if you look at the spine, you can see that, I'm sorry, it's just focusing on my face, but you can see that it gets darker progressively as the story progresses, and it actually makes perfect sense when you read the book why this is happening. This is an absolutely stunning story. I cannot believe it's a debut novel. It just read as something that could have come only from a very mature writer. I loved this book. This is definitely a very interesting and compelling read. I struggled to identify it as a contemporary because, yes, it is a YA contemporary book. However, the elements of what was happening made me believe that it that it is magical realism, and to some extent, I still believe after finishing the book that it was. But at the same time, it is still a contemporary story. Plus, it's a love story, it's a story about friendship. It is very intense at times. Things that happen there are extremely intense, not just physically, but also emotionally, and you just have to be ready, and most of the time I was not ready for it because I was just flying through pages. I love this book so much that after reading a library copy, I went and immediately bought my own copy of this book, and also I'm going to pre-order the next book by this author, which is coming out this October. I just cannot wait to read what more she can write, because this was amazing. Also, this author has a short story which is available for free on Kindle. However, that story should be read only after you read this novel, because even though it's short and free, you would not understand what it means unless you read this book. And once you do, and then you go and read that story, I swear you'll probably cry. Believe me, you will. It's just, I read this book and I had such a huge book hangover. I just wanted to read this book over and over and over again. But I don't think I can, because it was just so intense that I kind of need some time for myself. I still have not reviewed this book on my blog because I'm trying to collect myself and I want to do this book justice, but hopefully I will be able to provide the link down below soon. So obviously I gave this book 5 stars. Next, I read one of my most anticipated books of 2018, and that was Sightwitch by Susan Dennard. If you read Truthwitch and Windwitch, or maybe just Truthwitch, you might be very curious about what happened with Cullen and Ryber, and this is the book that tells you their story, and obviously this book is set before Truthwitch. However, once I read this book, I realized that it gives you an explanation for certain things that happen at the end of Truthwitch and also throughout Windwitch. And it's almost a spoiler. I was really surprised. I mean, obviously this book was written with Truthwitch and Windwitch being out into the world, but I did not expect it to be linked so heavily to those two books. At some point it does read like not as exactly as a standalone, but as a prequel, as like a proper prequel, but once I realized what was happening in there actually meant for Windwitch, it really, squeezed my heart. So I would suggest, if you would like to start with Witchlands series by Susan Dennard, do not start with this one. Start with Truthwitch and then continue with Windwitch and then go with this one. So to say, in the order of publication as opposed to in chronological order, because this book will make you cry ugly tears just because, like, if you have the knowledge of Windwitch, yes, and oh my god. This is not a very long book. It's a very short book. It's about 50,000 words, I believe, and it does have some images in it, like, for example, this one and some other stuff. For example, this one, and it is a very good companion book for other Witchlands series novels. And the cover is stunning. I really enjoyed this book a lot. I know that a lot of readers were very disappointed by the fact that Blood Witch, which is a third book in the series, was delayed by a year, and instead we got this one instead of getting Blood Witch. However, I think this book was very much worth the wait. It was very well written, it flows amazingly, it has great dialogues and a lot of suspense when it comes to side witches. I really enjoyed it, and like I said, your heart will get squeezed if you know what happens to those characters later in the books. So obviously I give this book 5 stars. No competition here. Susan Dennard has a very, firm place in my heart, so I'm very excited, and I cannot wait to read Truthwitch, actually. I want to reread it because after reading this one, I kind of want to stay in the Witchlands series. Too bad we have to wait another 12 months for our next book. Next, I read Keeper by Kim Chance. Kim Chance is a fellow author, tuber, and booktuber, and I'll provide the link down below to her channel. So since I've been following her for some time, I knew quite well that she was about to release her debut novel, Keeper, and when there was a Twitter giveaway, I obviously jumped on the chance to get my hands on an early copy of Keeper, and I was so happy to get a copy, and I'm so grateful to Kim for providing me with the opportunity to read her book for free. Keeper is a YA urban fantasy novel about Lainey, who discovers that she comes from a long lineage of witches, and not just any witches, but the witches who are responsible for keeping Grimoire, a very important magical book, safe. And once she discovers it, it turns out that a lot of things that she believed in throughout her life were not true. Not only Lainey is being haunted by vivid images and dreams of some other person centuries ago who's trying to keep Grimoire safe, but also she's being haunted by magical beings who want her dead. I think Keeper was a very well-written book for a debut novel. I know that Kim Chance spent months and years working on this book, and it definitely paid off. It's well-written, it's very well put together. Even though I read unproofed copy of her book, I still think that it was very well written and put together. However, I had some issues with the way things were developing, and it has to do mostly with the plot. I felt that the plot had a lot of cliches and a lot of tropes. We obviously have a main protagonist, we have the best friend who is also a sidekick, we also have a love interest in this book that appears basically from the very beginning, and even though I did like Ty, I had a lot of problems with the way the relationship between him and Lainey was portrayed. There was a lot of other moments in which I felt that the book didn't really stand out from other urban fantasy books, even though it has a very distinctive southern flair, which is rare, I would say, because I read only Anne Rice and Poppy Bride. These are two authors that come to mind when I think about urban fantasy, horror, or something else set in a southern gothic. Definitely in this way, Keeper does stand out. However, there are so many tropes and so many cliches when it comes to portraying characters and everything that happens, including this big moment somewhere close to the ending of the book. I felt like all of those things were done just to ensure that it attracts the audience, but there are so many other books on the market right now which are very similar that Keeper does not really stand out that much. And it made me very sad because obviously Kim is very talented as she's able to write a very good prose, but having good prose and good voice, since she managed to create very likable and lovable characters. I particularly liked Maggie, who was the best friend of Lainey, and also Gareth, who was her uncle. I loved those characters. However, I felt that the tropes in the plot were the downfall of this book. Nevertheless, I'm very appreciative of the fact that I got to read this book for free. I'll provide the link down below to my full review. Please check it out. And I gave this book 3 stars, but I think that Kim has a potential to write much better books. We'll see how it goes. I know that the ending of Keeper can be viewed as an open ending in a way. However, there is no sequel so far, and there is no set date for release of that sequel, but I'm still very hopeful that Kim gets a chance to write the sequel, because obviously this book would benefit from the sequel a lot. If you remember from my January wrap-up, I got sucked into books by Cassandra Clare, and I read Clockwork Angel, and I was very critical of it. However, the way it was written was almost addictive. You know, like fast food. You really love fast food and you cannot stop eating that. This is how I felt when I continued reading with Infernal Devices. So next I read Clockwork Prince and I really enjoyed it. I felt that it was much better written compared to Clockwork Angel. Obviously, this whole book, as its second book in the trilogy, is mostly about Tessa and her relationship with Jem. And we have this infamous love triangle between Will, Jem, and Tessa. And I was not, I cannot say I was not a huge fan of this triangle. I just felt that it was so glaringly obvious from the very beginning that this is where Cassandra Clare is going to go as a writer that I was not surprised. I was just surprised that it took a whole second book to develop the relationship between Tess and Jem. Seriously, like a whole book? It's like 500 pages. Nevertheless, I felt that this book was just basically the same as reading a fan fiction about your favorite characters. Which, in a way, the Infernal Devices, when you think about it, is exactly what it is. It's like an alternative universe fanfiction of the Mortal Instruments books 1/3. But since this is the first time I delved into Cassandra Clare books, I started with Infernal Devices, and Clockwork Angel was the first book I ever read by Cassandra Clare, and this was the second one. And even though I knew that the Mortal Instruments came before it, so obviously these books, Cassandra Clare kind of have already found her footing and she knew what she was doing, I still felt that these books were more like guilty pleasure as opposed to reading something serious, but I got sucked into them and I enjoyed this book way more than I enjoyed Clockwork Angel, like I said, so I gave this book 4 stars. However, I must say, the copywriter did a very bad job on this book. There was a moment in which I think it was Jem who got out of bed, put on his boots, and then went to the wardrobe to put on his pants. Yeah. Next, I obviously went straight to Clockwork Princess, and this is even a thicker book. Oh my god, obviously Cassandra Clare was just having a field day writing it. This is obviously the book where everything goes down, where things are discovered, hearts are broken, etc, etc. I cannot really give you a summary because that would be a spoiler if you have not read the previous 2. However, I liked this book the best. I think it was very well written and quite an interesting wrap-up for the Infernal Devices trilogy. Especially, I was impressed and surprised by the epilogue, considering that epilogue takes place in modern world as opposed to the whole book, which is in the 19th century. And obviously, if I had read the Mortal Instruments before reading these books, I would have probably understood what it meant, but I did not. But it just got me very excited, and I cannot wait to read more about these characters. However, at some point I also realized that I really needed to read the Mortal Instruments, and I decided that I'll read that next. Obviously, since I enjoyed this book the best from the Infernal Devices, I gave this book 4 stars. Once again, I would not call this series perfect or amazingly well written or anything of the sort. It's more like a guilty pleasure, but once you start, you cannot really stop reading them. Once I finished Clockwork Princess, I really wanted to dive straight into the Mortal Instruments, even though I had some reservations and I was worried that I would not like that trilogy as much as I like the Infernal Devices. But nevertheless, I did pick up City of Bones and I was so disappointed. I don't really want to give a synopsis of this book because I have a feeling as if everyone read those, or at least everyone knows what these books are about, but I just want to say that it is glaringly obvious that this was a debut novel by Cassandra Clare. It is very poorly written. It's not well edited, unfortunately. I found one of those amazing editorial mistakes in which someone, I believe it's Clary, she walks barefoot from one room into another and magically acquires a pair of sneakers in between those 2 rooms. Seriously, people, read what you're writing. Anyway, I did not really like this book. I felt as if I was rushing through it because I wanted to get to the point where I can read the other 3 books in the Mortal Instruments, the ones that Cassandra Clare wrote after the Infernal Devices, because I heard that they would be much better, and it's obvious because this book was horribly written compared to the Clockwork Angel, and I had some problems with the Clockwork Angel as well. Clockwork Angel feels like a very polished fanfiction, and this one is just like poorly written fanfiction. I cannot say I hated this book, I just felt that this book was very flat and unimaginative compared to some other books that I read in the genre, meaning the urban fantasy. but I did like how the world of shadow hunters is shown in the modern New York City, because this is something that I was really missing from the Infernal Devices. Don't get me wrong, the Infernal Devices is set in London and 19th century, and that is the time that I absolutely love. However, just reading about shadow hunters in modern setting was very exciting. I did like that part, and also liked some of the secondary characters, for example Luke, and I was not very fond of Clary from the very beginning. I was not very fond of Jace either. He was just super annoying, and now I kind of want to watch the TV show, but at the same time I feel as if I would just basically hate the pairing. Anyway, I flew through this book, but it did not really impress me, so I gave it only 2.5 stars, unfortunately. It was a very big letdown compared to the Infernal Devices, but I expected this to happen. I just did not expect it to happen to this rate, you know? I was still surprised by how horribly written it is. Nevertheless, there were some moments in this book by which I could really tell how Cassandra Clare has the potential, and obviously had the potential to develop her skills, and yeah, I was just disappointed. Maybe I should have started with this one. However, who knows, maybe I would have never even finished any other books, because this was just, it just did not live up to my expectations. Next, I immediately started reading City of Ashes, and I liked it slightly better. When I say slightly, I gave this book 2.75, so it was slightly better than City of Bones, but still not as good. There are a lot of things in this book which revolve around Simon and Clary, and I'm not a huge fan of Clary, but she's at least okay. Simon I really dislike, and having just a lot of things happen and just happen with Simon and be about Simon, it was really annoying. In some ways, Simon in my head is linked with Nate from the Infernal Devices, even though I can tell you that there's no connection, absolutely no connection. They're not reflections of each other, they're not descendants of each other, zero connection. But it's just my head, in my head, there was just something which I hated from the very beginning about Nate, and there is just something I hate about Simon, unfortunately. I also found this whole brother-sister, not brother-sister thing very annoying, because it almost reminded me of a lot of plots and incests in anime and manga, and like siblings turning out to be not siblings, etc., etc. It was just so dumb, and it was so obvious when like she introduced that plot twist, and it just became so obvious that it's not true. I'm sorry if it's a spoiler, but it's obvious that it's not true. How can a writer write something and make it so glaringly fake that a reader just cannot believe it? I mean, like, I got a kick out of reading about all the inks, but otherwise it just was not working for me. But like I said, it was slightly better than City of Bones, so I gave it 2.75, about 3 stars. And the last but not least was the book that I got from NetGalley, and that was Ibuki by Catherine Summerlot. So this is a standalone novella fantasy set in Imperial Japan, and the main focus of the story is on 2 priestesses, both from different temples, and they have different powers, and one of them discovers that the emperor has a dark secret. And basically this is the story about how they're trying to uncover this dark secret and what it means, etc., etc., and this is also a love story between those 2 women. Since this was just a novella, I read it quite quickly, basically in less than 2 days. I did enjoy it, however, I had some problems with the plot. It felt that there were no character development whatsoever. There were just very few characters to begin with. We had one character from one temple, her father, and also another character from another temple, maybe just a handful of other people, even less than that. I felt that the world was not very well developed, even though the setting of the Imperial Japan was absolutely beautiful and it was described pretty well. However, it felt that all the action was saturated and situated around two temples and nothing else. I couldn't see the whole world, so to say. I'm not sure it was intended like that. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I could not just envision everything that was happening. More so, I had problems with the way that the magic was described, or rather was not described. We know that certain powers come from certain gods, and so that's why those people serve in those temples, because they have those powers, but definitely I cannot really explain how magic system worked in that book. I also had problems with the romantic relationship in this book because I felt that it was very too insta-love like, and it just didn't feel right for this type of setting. Still, it is very rare to see a fantasy book about female-female relationship, so I want to give some sort of credit to the author for creating the story. Just shut up. Just shut up. I felt that this love story was very cliche. I felt that this story overall was very cliched, which made me very sad because we don't get that many fantasy stories with a female-female relationship, and I just wanted this book to be so much better. It was a nice quick read, something that I could read while commuting, but I would not really recommend it as something to pursue on purpose, so to say. I'm still very curious to see what other books this particular publisher might produce, because Space Mag, also Ibuki, and one other book which came from this publisher were quite different and in some ways a bit disappointing, but I'm still very curious and I'm going to pay attention to that publisher on that galley. Anyway, I gave this story 2.75. I wish I could have given this story higher rating, but unfortunately it was just a bit disappointing. Okay guys, this is it. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that this video is not like 2 hours long, because my January video was just gigantic, so to say. Please let me know down below if you read any of the books that I mentioned, and I'll see you very soon in my next video. Bye! Our main I need water. Novel that has to do about like, ooh. However, I felt that it was very... There is a kid yelling outside of my door. Why? I felt that the story was quite cliched in some ways, and that made me very sad because... Fucking Christ.